Hello, everybody. So today I am super excited to welcome our very, very own Chief of Ops, Celene, to the show. Celene, welcome.
Hi, I'm so excited for this topic today.
Yeah, so what is that topic, you may be wondering? Well, we have just come off of round of hiring and we came to some really, really interesting and in-depth conclusions around hiring. And I really feel that these last few rounds of hiring we have been some of the most successful yet, where hiring's been a real pain point for us in the past. So I have invited Celene to the show because she is, among other things, our overseer of people. And she was the one who was overseeing this last hiring process. So we're going to get in deep and kind of touch on a few main takeaways and gold nuggets that we learned around hiring this session. You excited, Celene?
I am so excited.
Awesome. So why don't you just start by giving us a little bit of context as to what was going on this round of hiring, kind of what we were looking for, and kind of the context around it.
Sure. So this round of hiring, what we were looking for was our new chief of admin. This is kind of going to get into a bit further down, but we actually posted it as administrative manager because chief of admin might not be something that people are searching or can connect to. But that's what we were hiring for. And in the past, we've hired more of a VA position where someone is kind of the hands and not the brains. And our last couple hires, we've come to realize that actually what we're looking for is someone who is the brain, someone who is in the leadership role, who's taking the lead and designing systems and, using critical thinking for themselves. So and you obviously, when I say we, I mean you and myself, we sat down and we had, several meetings where we've talked specifically about not only what were we looking for in a role, but how do we identify that person? How do we attract that person? Like, not only how do we identify them from the applicants we get, but how do we make sure that that person that we want is applying in the first place? And then how do we choose the right person once we've kind of got to that place?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to, clarify, maybe even get a little bit vulnerable here, we have had a lot of challenges around this admin position in the last 3 or 4 years. Content strategists, during the early years, we had a lot of issues with writer turnover, but, at this point, basically, we're still working with the first strategist that we hired. But of course, content strategy is something that we know really well. So it was a lot easier to screen for. Something that we really struggled with, and I think a lot of our listeners can probably relate to as well, is understanding what the admin role needs to be. And on some level, you read these like lists and actually let me back up a little bit. This can look differently depending on whether you are hiring your first admin person or whether you are hiring kind of an admin person to support a team, let's say hiring an admin person to support you versus a team. And, you read these articles that are like 100 things that you can delegate to a VA, or, you talk to other people and you're like, what are you delegating? What are you doing? But for us, really, I think a key challenge, because we've had a series of people that just weren't a good fit. And sometimes it was really because they seemed to be going through like personal emergencies a lot. And we were like, not even because they weren't doing the right work or being a good fit culture wise. So we really had to ask ourselves, what is this role? And are we even hiring for the right role? So sorry, that's a little bit of I don't know if that was a tangent. I think that was a kind of a clarification on what you were saying, Celene.
No, that's some really good background. And I've even seen, posts on different digital agency community groups of people stating, like, with absolute certainty that VA positions will always be a high turnover and it's a self-fulfilling cycle that can't be fixed. But obviously we're on a mission to not get into that trap.
For sure. I've also seen though too, on the other hand, I've seen somebody like hiring the first VA that they come across, like the first VA that they hire being with them for like 8 to 10 years. Sometimes I wonder now whether those are more like urban legends. But our goal here today is actually to take that idea and to help you not have it be an urban legend and actually have it be a reality for your business so that you can actually hire with a lot more confidence, hire in a way that you feel reasonably assured that number one, you're hiring for the right position. Number two, you are hiring the right person. And number three, and these are not exactly the kind of bullets we'll follow. These are the things that we're hoping you'll get out of it, right? Is that you will be able to actually help that person succeed with you guys in the long term and have them be a heck yes fit, not just a yay, this person can do the job that we need.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what are we going to cover? What are we going to cover in today's episode?
So I guess what I kind of envisioned us covering is talking through kind of the biggest pitfalls that people have when they're hiring, because there's always kind of these little blockages that come up. First of all, like usually a lot of people are pretty successful at understanding the role they're wanting to hire for, but not always. Sometimes people just kind of dive in before taking that step back. But other than that, like the biggest things I see is the job description itself isn't necessarily engaging.
So that's number one.
That's number one. The compensation is not adequate for the position, or the responsibilities are unrealistic. Like they're trying to hire a position where someone's doing like way more than a single human can cover, like too many hats they're trying to toss off on one person. That's number two. Mm-hmm. Number three is proper screening. Like assuming that you knock 1 and 2 out of the park and you have this perfect pool of candidates, how do you find out which person is actually that amazing fit?
That's the big one.
That's the big one. Although if you don't get number 1 and 2 right, you might not have a very good candidate pool to choose from, or you might have a great candidate pool of people who are wrong for the role.
And that's something we've experienced as well. That was one of the reasons why we were kind of really, really putting our heads together, is because the last few rounds, we've had 200 or 300 people come through our system, and there was at least one round of hiring maybe 6 months or a year ago where we weren't stoked. We were okay with our 3 candidates. We weren't super stoked on any of them. And that was a little bit depressing.
Yeah. And number 4 is cultural influence on hiring choices.
Yeah. This one's a little bit more ephemeral. Well, maybe not ephemeral, but this one took us longer to come to. Because what is culture? What is culture?
Yeah. So those are the 4 things. So I guess I'll just loop right around and start back at number 1. So I'm going to touch just very briefly on understanding the role that you're hiring for. As I'm sure you're aware, because again, we did this together, the very first thing that a lot of people do is to kind of sit down and think, what are the tasks that person will do? Which is fine. But what we've come to realize over the years is it's not always about just what tasks are they doing, but how do you want them to do it? For example,
can I actually dive in? I actually want to reframe that, because for me, the way I kind of frame it in my head that really works is not what tasks do you want people to do. I mean, that's important, but that's a starting place. But what type of person does this person have to be enthusiastically successful at the type of jobs and tasks that we need them to do? It's what sort of person are they? Do they have to be, not what can they do?
Exactly. And so, since we obviously just hired for the admin position, I'll kind of use that as an example, is we have a lot of different apps that we use. There's Slack, there's Teamwork, there's Acuity, there's Zoom. We're using a Zencaster right now. There's dozens and dozens. And a lot of the time, the chief of admin, one of the things that they get tasked with is sorting out different issues, trying to find maybe a better alternative, trying to find ways that these apps can integrate with each other or automations. And so it takes a really, really nerdy type of person to get excited about digging into the back end of these programs. So it's not just someone can someone learn programs? It's is someone excited to find these little hacks or whatever it may be and get really amazing at them.
Yeah. And I want to say that, back up a little bit in that this is almost like the concept of a customer avatar. Now, it's not going to be quite that specific in terms of, you're not going to be giving these demographic information, like, is this a man or a woman? How old are they, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But what was really helpful for us, is previously every single time we were kind of making a list of tasks. Often we were looking at the tasks that we were doing in in a day, tasks that we maybe wanted or didn't want to be doing in a day, or that we struggled with, or that we sucked at, or that we were struggling to keep up with, and wanted to basically give those to someone else, right? But as has been quoted extensively in a book that I quite like, which is Clockwork, by the same author as Profit First, Mike Michalowicz, he talks about how there's different levels of delegation. And for the admin role in particular, which I do think this is kind of a pain point for our audience. So even though these considerations are great for hiring any role, I do want to speak to that particular one. We really found that some of the mistakes or issues or things that weren't getting done to our satisfaction with previous admin people really came down to, like, when I thought about it, I would sometimes feel frustrated because I would be like, well, how could they have missed this? How could they have missed this? Not just, oh, it's super simple or it's super easy. But when I thought about that more, like literally, why did this get missed? I realized that there are some things that personality does drive. For example, if someone is super, super, super attentive to detail, you're going to have a lot more success getting them to do, for example, the final proofreading on a document than getting your content strategist. This is, again, a real example. Then, for example, getting your content strategists who are really, really good at that high level strategy, the writing, the kind of creative, intense, logical work. But maybe when it comes down to every single formatting piece on the document being formatted in a certain way, the way we like it organizationally, that's not going to be their specialty, right? So when we say who a person is, we really mean like their intrinsic, not just skills, but inclinations. The example that Celene was giving is that, previously for admin, we were looking at tasks like organizing our huge library of videos that get saved and recorded because we record all of our meetings versus, and we were looking at tasks like sorting email. This is a list of tasks, right? Versus when we really sat and thought about it, as Celene said, we realized, wow, we have so many, what problems are we experiencing? What do we really need someone to help that we don't have the expertise? And it really was that technical oversight, the back end of the app, someone who would come in and rather than making sure that our newsletter is scheduled to go out at the right time, they can come into a marketing meeting and being like, oh, hey, have you considered setting up this automation, that automation? Did you know that this app can do that? And maybe I'm going to look in and recommend something better for you. And the reason for that is not because they have the app skills so much, but because they are the type of person who just naturally wants to innovate and has the drive to really make things better and the desire to really, like, the way I described it is it's the type of person, that person that and we all know someone like this in their life, who just when they get a new phone or a new piece of tech or new software, systematically goes through the settings just because they want to know. That friend that you're always getting to like set up your phone or your computer or your whatever, just because they really like it. Maybe they work in that field, maybe they don't. We're looking for that type of person, not just somebody who we can check off that they have the experience.
Exactly. And it's funny that you should mention the, getting your friend to help, because we even asked our team, what are you looking for in a chief of admin, or what have you really loved about previous people in that role? And what we heard a lot was that kind of nurturing aspect, that they're always there to help and they want to help. It's not like that kind of bad stereotype nerd off in the corner who's really aloof and like pretty condescending. It's the person who actually was like, yeah, I want to hop on a call right now and walk you through this, or what can I do to help you? Like that kind of attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is where we kind of go into the engaging job description, right? Mm-hmm. And what are some of, because of course, figuring this out is part of the challenge, but then you have to convey it in a way that people can self-identify. And maybe as part of the show notes here, Celene, we could actually include our job description. Now, granted, we are, of course, copywriters, but we have actually done this for partners as well. We have been hired to write resumes, job descriptions, etc., because that is copy just as much as any other piece of copy is copy. Celene, what are some of the things that you want to make sure that your job description does? Like, how do you know if you have a good job description or a bad job description?
Well, first of all, you don't want it, again, I mean, we talked about the list of tasks, but you don't want it to just be that kind of list of tasks. For example, for an administrative manager position, there are probably thousands of job descriptions just for that position on the web, and most of them are all probably pretty much exactly the same. So someone going through isn't, first of all, they're not going to get excited to apply for your job. They're just going to go click, 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 because they're just applying for as many as possible, and they're not going to put that energy and effort and excitement into it. I've had several people tell us after we hired them that reading that job description, which by the way is like 2,000 words or something ridiculous, that reading that job description, they loved reading it because it self-described them. And they felt like we knew exactly who they were on a deep level the entire time they were reading it.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, just a note on long job descriptions. This is something else I've read in a few different places. I want to say that Clockwork was one of the books I got that from, but don't be afraid. Like, a job description needs to do two things. It needs to both help people self-identify and help people self-disqualify. And with that in mind, don't be afraid to make it long, like ridiculously long. Like, we even warn people at the beginning, it's going to be long, but for the right person, that is going to be super engaging because they're interested to know more. I mean, they may not read every single little word of it, but they're going to keep reading. They're not just going to skip to the end because it's like reading a story for them, a story that they are being invited to.
And it actually pays dividends later on, because for that person who reads the whole thing and knows they're perfect for the job, they actually end up referencing the job description or tailoring their application to your job description. So you can actually know like who actually read the job description and who really was excited about it, because you can see that they referenced it or show how they align with it in their later application.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one thing you'll hear a lot about is including something for people, kind of like a trick question or a trick thing for people to kind of answer or include in their application. Now, this isn't something that we particularly do. We have other kind of checks and balances in place. We've mentioned in other episodes how we have kind of a series of assessments and frameworks. We'll get into that a little bit later. But, for the purpose of this, having that long job description, as Celene is saying, like, it will be obvious. It will be obvious when people liked it and engaged with it and start referencing it.
Yeah. So what else should this job description do? Because there's a couple more things that I think are really important. Does it paint a picture of what the job is actually like? I can't even list how many times I've applied for a job and got the job, like back in that kind of college and pre-college days where I just whatever job was fine. And then I got there and I actually had no idea what I'd actually be doing. I would pretty much just kind of show up and not know what to expect. And sometimes those worked out and sometimes those didn't, because it might not have been the best job for me. But if you really want that long-term perfect hire, the person applying for your job needs to have a really good idea of exactly what they're doing so they can decide whether that's in their skill set, whether that's the type of thing they like to do, whether it has that good balance of their personal preference of kind of boring routine tasks and interesting, critical thinking tasks.
I kind of agree and give examples once again. When we hired Jen, our account manager, we were very, very clear. We were like, do you look at, and this is something, Brent Weaver, former coach of mine, really great guy, had a suggestion around. It was just like, show them a calendar, show them a schedule. With Jen, it was like, are you okay being on video pretty much all day, every day? Because that's what a lot of your job is going to be versus, with the admin role, it was like, imagine this. You have messages flying your way on Slack. You have tons of messages every hour. Your mission is to give order to the chaos.
Exactly.
Again, painting that picture, even sometimes it can be scary. And it's the same thing with marketing copy as well, where you don't want to kind of scare people away. You're afraid, I don't want to be negative. I don't want to overwhelm people. I don't want people to not apply or something because we're making it sound overwhelming. Now, I'm not saying that you should overstate or overplay or really drive home that this is going to be a terrible position in some way or it's going to be really stressful. But it's worthwhile to be honest about these kinds of things.
And the thing is, for the right person, that's not going to be scary.
Exactly.
For example, the account manager position, for the right person, it's going to be energizing and exciting to be in video calls all day long. Versus if someone read that and they were terrified of it, then you definitely do not want them in that position. You don't want to hire someone and then they find out that they have to be on video all day and they're like, no, I can do some videos, but I need my downtime where I'm just working alone.
Yeah, which interesting is even like me. I've had to face up against that a few times and realize that I thought I was the type of person who could be on video all day, every day. But actually, I am definitely an omnivert who needs to have several hours of work day every day where I'm not talking to anybody.
Yeah.
So, it's these things aren't perfect, but helping people self-identify like right away if they're getting kind of like stress feelings or stoked feelings, that will help them understand and help you understand whether they're good.
And I mean, similarly, you talked about self-disqualifying earlier and painting the picture. It's okay to have a list and, again, you'd be quote unquote negative. It's okay to have a list of like, this is not a position for you if.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's great.
And not only is it okay, but it's like we put it in every single job description, because sometimes people might read that and they might not self-disqualify either because they're not self-aware enough to realize it's not a good fit, or because they just kind of skim through the bulk of it or whatever it is. But having that like do not apply if line works really well. For example, in our administrative manager job description, we said you're balancing multiple part-time gigs and looking for extra cash. A lot of these are fueled by pitfalls we've experienced in the past with the role, is people thinking, it's an online job, the hours are flexible, I can squeeze it in around my other job. And then we end up with someone who's working like 3 different jobs and they're super overwhelmed and burnt out and they're not focused on doing the best job for us. Or another example from the admin job description is you're in an opposite time zone, for example, the Philippines, and you aren't your most productive at night. It's not that we are against hiring from someone from the Philippines, but in the past we've had people who think, I don't mind working some night hours or in the middle of the night. And then it turns out that they are not night owls and they just sleep through their shifts, or even some things that are more, not quite as concrete, but that they might identify with, like you tend to withdraw or disappear when you're overwhelmed, either at home or at work, which some people do. And it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just that that's not the position or the person for this position, because there are going to be some overwhelming times. And that's when communication is more critical than ever, not the kind of you back off and don't say anything.
Absolutely. And again, that's not a like criticism on people who may think or respond in that certain way. That is what we've come to understand about the culture around what our business needs, who we are as a team. And I will say this, now that we are a team of 8, at least I find that it's actually easier to understand and make some of those culture decisions than when it was just you and me, or anywhere in between, simply because it's easier to separate it from what are my personal preferences as a person and what is the business's kind of personality and what do they need. And we'll get into kind of cultural influences and various types of that a little bit later on.
Yeah.
Just wanted to touch on kind of the last thing in an engaging job description is also don't be afraid to really show your personality as a business.
Do it as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just to kind of help you stand out from the million other job descriptions out there, but again, so that people can self-identify. Like that's this word culture, what does it mean, right? Your values as a business, like we have heard countless times over the years to kind of hire and fire and live by your values in the business, but especially to hire and fire by them. And this is, again, one of those things that we thought we understood, but has become a lot more clear in the last few years. And, we have now had a practice for a year or two of all of our candidates kind of one by one going through our values and kind of talking through whether they've shown examples of that. But it's taken a much more, I think, nuanced and in-depth understanding of our values and how they apply day to day for that process to be as effective as it.
Absolutely. And I know basically every time someone didn't work out with us, it was because of conflict in values. It wasn't because we couldn't train them or they couldn't learn a specific task or anything like that. It was because of a direct conflict with one of our values, like whatever it may be at the time. That's the reason it's been every time that someone hasn't worked out.
Yeah. And usually it's not literally that a conflict, but it is
misalignment.
Misalignment. Yeah. Just again, so people kind of have that clarity. For example, self-awareness is a really big one. Self-awareness is really, really huge for us. And, we have quite a few kind of examples and thoughts now around what self-awareness actually means and how it is practiced. But we found that somebody who is very, very smart, very, very capable, very, very compassionate but who isn't self-aware. And that's not something that not just like they're willing to be self-aware, but again, like we love being self-aware. We're addicted to being self-aware. We challenge each other when they're not being self-aware, and we thank each other for challenging us when they're not being like, it's just, we constantly kind of want to look at those dark places in our soul so that we can grow. And someone who's really, really great on paper in every other way, but just doesn't have that value, has really not been a good fit for us in the past. And it took a long time to figure that out.
Yeah.
But that was why.
And it's not that they're not a good employee or a good person or very skilled, like you said. It's just that they're not a good fit for us, which is why it's important to have your personality. I mean, even another example from the account manager job description is, again, this is one of our, like, this is not a position for you if things, but that we also looked throughout, is if someone's main focus is on making the sale or quickly making a whole bunch of sales, they're not the person for us, because what we were looking for when we were hiring is someone who wants to nurture those deep relationships and take their time and really get to know someone, which again isn't the right approach for every job as an account manager. But that was something that was really important to us and how we run as a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And for us in particular, an account manager position involves quite a bit of training, not necessarily us training them, but them actually like training and consulting on sales and marketing for other people. That's part of the account management. And again, so that requires both knowledge, but also a particular approach for how we want that training to go, which is pretty much governed by our values.
Yeah.
But we've spent a lot of time talking about number one. Maybe we should move on to number two.
Okay. There's just one more thing I want to say about the engaging job description. It will actually help you attract more people than you otherwise would, because they want to work for you and you alone. I can't even count the number of times that people have said hey, this, I don't think this job is necessarily in line with the compensation I've received in the past, but I don't even care because I want to work with you.
Yeah. When we started doing the 2,000 plus word job description and really rethinking it from what they do to who they are, and including a few of the things that they do, but really shifting our focus here, we went from having 100, 200 applicants or stuff to people literally calling my personal cell phone, people reaching out afterwards, not quite demanding, but really, really wanting to know why they weren't accepted, how they could do better and be accepted if another position was opened up. Somebody told me that we actually inspired them to leave their current job, even though they weren't hired by us, to pursue something that they love more, in the hopes that, again, if we have another position in a few years, that maybe they could apply again, or if not, that they could find a job that inspires them as much as our job description and process inspire them. That's a huge compliment. That's a huge compliment. That's really cool, right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I am gonna, move us through a bit quicker. Number two, I think, is fairly quick. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this one, but it's adequate compensation and realistic responsibilities. It should be a no-brainer. But I end up talking to a lot of people about their hiring problems, and pretty much whenever someone tells me straight up that they can't find any qualified applicants, I look at their job description and I'm like, yeah, nobody with that level of experience you're looking for is going to work for that wage. It's just not going to happen. Of course, you're not finding anyone qualified. Qualified people cost more money.
Yeah. And again, to acknowledge, and we'll get into this later on as we get to kind of cultural impacts and stuff, maybe it's good to just reference it now, is that depending on the job that you're hiring for, depending on your office type, right, there are definitely constraints around this, but we are blessed to live in a global world where you have the opportunity in a lot of situations to pull from a global pool of candidates. And what might be a fair wage in one place may not be a fair wage in another place. Again, we'll get into this a little bit later, but one of the reasons that we in particular kind of have a mix of overseas people, across Canada and beyond, is that, there are some roles where it's really appropriate to have somebody who is Canadian sitting in that role, or even somebody who's in BC sitting in that role, like Celene and I as the leadership team, it is really, really beneficial for us to actually be able to physically travel and meet together and have that energy between us. That being said, though, like we believe in a living wage, and there are some roles where if we tried to hire someone locally, like we literally could not. We just could not. So like, again, that compensation, like ask yourself if you're like, oh, well, I want to pay more, but I can't pay more. Ask yourself, is there a creative solution? Is there a part of the role someone could do for only part of the time at a higher wage and still give you that value? Or is there perhaps another country you can hire from where you can pay them a living wage where they're going to be stoked on that job and have that expertise that you need, right? Did you have anything to add to that?
Only that, like the no, don't ever do is post a job with no salary at all, because it's a huge red flag for a lot of applicants. So a lot of people will skip your job description without applying because they just assume if you can't list a salary, it's because it's too low and nobody would apply for it, for the position with it listed. So, whenever you can, list the salary. If there's a reason you don't want to list it or you feel hesitant about it, ask yourself why.
Yeah. And there's an option saying starting at, or, you can give a range. A range is quite good, right? That's actually our general policy is we give a range. And we let people know also the non-financial compensations. Don't ignore the financial compensation in favor of the non-financial compensations. But again, people care about more than just the money. If you have a policy on kind of vacations, or you have an upwardly mobile opportunity, or there's room for upward mobility in that role.
Or flexible hours. Like if people can, maybe work 5 hours a day set shift, but the other 3 hours are at their own, not at their own discretion whether they work it, but when they work it. Or if they can kind of choose their own shift and stick to that, or whatever it may be. That's a big selling point for people.
Yeah. One note, this isn't so much around the admin, but around the kind of sales account manager style hiring, which I think is something else people have challenges with. I really think it's important if you are offering some sort of bonus or commission structure, if not to explain it in great detail, maybe just to elaborate a little bit on what that means, because that can mean so many different things.
I mean, well, as you know, my husband is in sales, and when he was in the past year looking for a job, there might have been like 4 or 5 jobs with the same base salary that say plus commission, but whatever the final salary was varied so much between them. Or sometimes it'd be like a super unrealistic thing where it's like, I don't know, $30,000 a year base, but up to $200,000 a year or something. And he looks at it and he's like, there's no chance that it's actually going to be a $200,000 a year job. You're just like making this number that's completely unattainable. And then they would show him the actual structure. He'd be like, so like, what does that look like? Can you show me like your previous year's finances or what someone in this role previously made? And they just say no straight to his face.
Yeah. Not that every business has a transparent model, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But, have reasoning for your decisions. If you have strong reasons behind your decisions and why you're offering and et cetera, again, do you like owe this to anybody? No, but if you want to start off your relationship with this new person from a place of trust and a place of excitement on their end, showing them that you value them up front by having this information kind of available, or at least having reasoning behind why you're kind of choosing certain things or certain policies. Again, that goes a long way towards getting started on a good foot.
Yeah. And you'll just have more applicants apply because, like I said, a lot of people won't apply to a job at all if they don't know what the compensation is.
Yep.
So let's move along to number 3, which is proper screening.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this is the one that I think people either think they are amazing at, but like really they're not, or they're completely clueless on it and they think I have all these great candidates. How do I choose that one that's the right person?
Or people are super, super optimistic. They get really, really stoked on a candidate early on because they hope that, they're just stoked on them for some reason. And then they kind of run on that stoke and kind of let the rest of the screening process go.
Yeah, I actually, I'm guilty of that. But thankfully we have such a rigid set of way of scoring candidates that it kind of eliminates my personal bias.
Yeah. And that, that's actually a gold nugget there too, Celene, because we found this as well in other parts of the business, like for example, discipline, etc. If you're someone who knows that you kind of struggle with something, especially if it has to do with people and either, bringing stuff up or setting boundaries or, again, getting super excited and wanting to kind of ditch your process and just embrace the first person that you interview. A really good approach to this is to kind of set a little bit stricter kind of boundaries or process. No, boundaries is usually something you have to enforce personally. A process is a criteria. Yeah. Like we found that by doing the thinking up front and then putting the pressure on the criteria we've set instead of on your own personal decision-making skills. As a leader, we're making so many decisions every day. The emotional kind of implications of that can come back and bite you in the ass. Mm-hmm. Let's just be honest. But setting up criteria, as we'll get into a little bit more in terms of screening, can go a long way towards making sure that you're making the decisions based on the same criteria that you were last week and the week before as you are today.
Yeah. And I'll kind of give just a very, very short amount of context in terms of how we hire is we use an app called Vervo. That part's not important, but what's important is we have 2 stages of screening. So the first stage is we ask a bunch of questions that people fill out online about their background, their experience, some skill testing questions, those sorts of things. And the second stage is on culture and logistics. And so for each question they answer, we're able to score them on a scale of 1 to 10. And so, sometimes at the beginning, the candidates aren't that great. So there's all kind of getting scored high, but then you get a wave of way more qualified candidates. And you're like, oh no, I can't score higher. Or sometimes depending on your mood, you score differently. So we actually have a set list of, for a 5, they need to have this in their answer. For a 6, they need this in their answer. For a 10, they need to have this. So that every time, even whether you score it or I score it or anyone scores it, it's very, it's structured. That we're not going to change day to day, like you said. Yeah. So in terms of how do you ask? What types of questions do you ask and how do you decide what questions to ask?
No, sorry, before you get into that, can you just maybe speak for a few moments about the because I think for a lot of people that might seem a little daunting to set up. So, you mentioned we're asking questions. So maybe just share at a higher level for those people who haven't seen our other episodes where we talk about this, just how do we hire that is kind of different from how other people hire? Can you talk about just the structure at a high level?
Yeah. So like I just mentioned, we have 2 rounds of online questions.
I realized I kind of know what I want to say. So asking you to say it. Yeah, I'm going to say it. Yeah. So basically, most hiring processes look a certain way, right? And that way is typically you put out a job description, you take in resumes. Sometimes, you might have people fill out a form to kind of organize them a little bit better or structure your candidates a little bit better. But we have actually found that resumes are one of the worst ways to hire. It is super, super, super time consuming. It is frustrating. You're basically judging people on how good they are at writing a resume because your best candidate might not be that good at writing a resume, especially if you're not hiring for, a job where the skills overlap the skills that writing a resume takes. So when Celene says that we're doing 2 rounds of online questions, we are actually directly from the job description, we are giving them a link to an assessment. Now, again, we use a tool for this, but you could totally set this up just very, very simply in Google Forms. Even with kind of a grading system, you can totally do that in Google Forms. So we are not collecting resumes at all. We are telling people, there's this 10 questions, there's this 10 question assessment for you to fill out. And we break down those assessments. There's 2 rounds of them, and then there's kind of how we choose the questions within them. So I just wanted to clarify that for people in case they're wondering, how are you asking these rounds of questions? Where do I do this? What does that look like? So circling us back around, how do you pick the questions that we ask, Celene?
So first of all, we kind of sat down and we talked about what, like you said, what are we actually looking for? And so for the first round, it's a combination of specific knowledge and innate capabilities. So for example, in our case, for the admin manager position, some of the innate capabilities we were looking for were critical thinking, organization, self-awareness, a lot of our, our values, those sorts of things. Specific knowledge, do they have an administrative background? Do they have experience with any of our programs? These things aren't necessarily deal breakers one way or another, but they're things we want to know. Like, do they have any experience with digital agencies or marketing or content?
And while that's information that a resume could tell us, by directly asking the questions, we can ask them in a way that allows us to kind of read between the lines on the answers a little bit.
So, I think, referencing the entrepreneurial operating system, they use something called the GWC, the get it, want it capacity to do it. What we're testing at this phase, especially, is do they get it? Like, do they have the understanding to be able to complete this job? So we started with kind of what we were looking for, and then we stepped back and we're like, how can we ask these questions? What sort of questions can we ask that will tell us whether they have these things we're looking for? So some of them were pretty kind of basic, like where are they located? What experience do they have that's relevant? What training do they have that's relevant? And then some of them are more where we kind of give them a scenario or ask us to tell us one of their personal experiences that will kind of illustrate whether or not they actually have that capacity that they may think they have, or they may have a different idea of it than we do. For example, like I mentioned that the admin position, a lot of it is about being a super nerd who loves working with apps and stuff. We asked them to tell us about a time they explored and mastered a new program. We even said, like, feel free to nerd out and tell us about a specific feature that you're super stoked on. And it was really interesting to see because some people would be like, oh, this is when I mastered Microsoft Word, and they talked about learning to like bold and italic and stuff. And this is them like thinking that they're mastering a program. Whereas some people like recorded a video going through the back end of settings, and you can tell that they're really truly excited about being a huge nerd and mastering programs.
Yeah, absolutely. So really kind of the gold nugget taking out of this is it's not just about what the answer to a question is, it's about how someone answers a question. Yes. And up front when we were going through and we planned a lot, like obviously love organizational stuff. We actually planned a lot of this out kind of in a mind map where we could easily kind of rearrange and change and adapt this information before we built it all out in forms. And for each of kind of the values that we were trying to hire for, we actually asked ourselves what sorts of things in answers would tell us if somebody has this value or this quality that we're looking for. An example would be systematic thinking, right? We're looking for in answers, are they naturally putting things into a hierarchy, right? Celene and I are both systematic thinkers. So this is something we're able to identify that we almost can't not do.
Yeah.
Because we think that way. Like I'm already, whenever I think even this, right? Like we're thinking about, okay, what are the things we want to talk about hiring? We naturally break it down into 4 points, each with certain subpoints and subpoints of that. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of naturally how our brains think. So we can see if somebody's answering a question and putting things into kind of like bullets and subheaders naturally, that they're probably a systematic thinker, even if they don't necessarily have the experience or the skill of, say, writing processes, which requires that.
And I think a really good example of this was someone, we asked them, like, what sort of programs or systems do you have experience with? And someone, they categorized their programs by, like, what type of it, whether it would be, like, a word processing, like Google Docs, like graphic program. They categorized it. They used numbered lists. And then not only did they put bullets, but instead of a dash, they actually copy and pasted like the bullet character into it. And their list was not nearly as impressive or as relevant as some of the other applicants. But compared to someone who just put like a single like list or a big dense paragraph with just commas of all the programs, it showed us that they were thinking about how are they organizing this information in a way that'll be meaningful to us.
Yes, which again, for that role was really important. For us, one of the admin kind of shifts that we made in terms of hiring for that role in particular is we went from looking with someone with perfect English because we thought, and again, we'll talk about our overseas thing a little bit later, because in the past we were doing there was a lot of questions where we were, again, asking a question, but we were analyzing their English because they might need to, say, respond to emails or write processes or things like that. And this time we actually, we kind of challenged each other a little bit as we were going through. We were like, oh, well, maybe this candidate doesn't have as strong grasp of like perfect grammar, But for, let's say, the account manager role, that's really, really important.
Yeah.
They need to have perfect English and grammar. For the admin role, it's far more important that they're able to do the kind of systematic thinking and stuff than having perfect grammar. Like, I can go back and forth a little bit and kind of unpack a message if their thought processes are in the right place and they're going above and beyond in the ways I need them to. And, it's really match this to the role. And don't be afraid, like this, as I so love to say, it really is an iterative process. This is a role that we have hired for over the past 3 or 4 years. Like, Celene originally came into the company because I hired her for an admin role. And then after a day or two of her working for me, I was like, you're wasted in an admin role. I need you on my leadership team. I'm going to woo you away. Anyway, we talked about that again in a different episode. But, when we are looking at who is a good fit for a certain role and or something like that, really that capacity to think in the way that you need is just so much more experience, so much more important than the specific skills.
Yeah. And I know it can sound really, really daunting to have to not only craft these questions, but then review these questions for a whole bunch of people. But I think it is so important because, this is something that I'm sure you've talked about in other podcast episodes in relation to content, but showing versus telling. Like, someone on their resume can have like 25 years experience at a job or 10 years experience at a job or whatever it is and still suck at it or not really get it or be a good fit. Whereas someone may have only been doing it a year or two, but they're so clever or they're so eager or whatever it is, they just have a natural aptitude for it that they can even be more successful, especially if they're hungry to learn, which is another thing we look for in roles we hire.
Absolutely. And just I just picked back up my train of thought from a few moments ago about the iterative process, is that don't expect to get this perfect the first time. Like, we have hired for this role over and over and over again. And we have hired in general, right? Like, we have expanded from just me to a team of 8 in the last few years. And not all of our team of 8 are the original team of people that we hired, right? We've hired a lot of people over the years. And not only is it good, every single time you do this is an opportunity to kind of reflect on what worked or didn't work last time and improve it. Every single time we've done this, we thought, great, we've perfected this now. And then next time we come to the process for whatever reason, whether it's the same job or not, we figure out ways to make it better. Not only that, but in the middle of the hiring process, come back and look at it again, right? The beautiful thing about this is that you can change it halfway through. Don't think to yourself, oh, I've already had 50 people come through this application. Looking at their answers, I can see how one question needs to be reworded, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to wait until all 200 people or whoever have gone through. Do not do that. Definitely look at it several times throughout the hiring process. People's answers are the best data you can get about whether your question is effective at gathering the information that you need. We have gone through, sometimes it's just that the question isn't being interpreted in the way that we are intending it. And sometimes it is that the thing that we were testing for with that question or assessing with that question is no longer something that's as relevant or appropriate. Or, hey, it turns out that the question just could be improved so that it is giving us answers on multiple levels instead of just one answer, right? It's showing us the how more effectively. So do look at this throughout the process, not just every single time you hire a new.
Yeah. And also, like, in addition, look at it every time you hire a new person. For us, like, you said it's an iterative process and we're improving our questions, but also our needs for who we're hiring is evolving. Like when it was just you and me and we were hiring a VA, we needed someone who could do a bulk of work that was more related to projects themselves, including like liaising with other agencies or whatever it may be. Now that we're a team of 8, the bulk of their work is supporting the systems of the company and supporting the team members. Yeah.
If I could call it, like, I would actually I've considered calling the role a systems manager or chief of systems as opposed to admin, just to kind of keep that clarity internally. But, as we kind of chatted about a little bit when you're picking words for your job descriptions and stuff, it's important to align it with what people kind of expect or think. Internally, we can call it whatever the heck we want. As Celene mentioned, we were hiring for an admin manager because when I was looking through job descriptions, those were the job descriptions which aligned the most with what we were looking for. So therefore, again, it builds a bigger candidate pool because people are going to be searching for those kind of keywords. But, you know, if I did look at what a systems manager or something, and a systems manager tends to be even more on kind of the tech side than what we were looking for. So anyway, that's another thing that you can do is kind of just like research and see what other people are calling the role. But for us, that was a huge evolution, right? When you're like 2 or 3 people using apps, like whatever, you email tech support when you don't understand something. But when every single person has a different, important, time-consuming role that they're taking in, that they need to have their full attention on, then having somebody who is purely focused on kind of these systems and making them run properly or more effectively or et cetera, you know, even just when we were listing them out, we realized that we now have 10 to 15 discrete systems that need management. Let me tell you, your average like 1 to 2 person business, if you have 16 discrete systems that need management, get that checked or check on that. Like that's probably too many. You probably don't need that many systems, right? You probably need a good project management system and a good invoicing system, you know, if that, and maybe a few other things for your area of expertise.
Yeah. And I do want to just kind of emphasize too that choosing the right title does make a difference. One of the big jumps that we made is we went from hiring a virtual assistant. I'm doing air quotes here. I don't know why. We went from hiring a virtual assistant to hiring like an administrative manager. And the type of person who was applying was going from the type of person who wants to be micromanaged, wants to take direction, doesn't really want to think for themselves, they just want to do the work, to the type of person who wants to take charge and make improvements where they can see improvements can be made and wants to be heard and have a voice and manage things. Just like the mindset of the type of person who applies to those 2 different job titles, regardless of the description, is completely different.
Yeah. And you hear, I don't know whether this is just me, but when people talk about virtual assistants and VAs, like that is a term I hear so often and have heard for years. And we hear about VAs basically like running a company, you know, like maybe not running the like specialty service that they do, but being able to do so much. I have yet to meet a VA with a true leadership attitude, personally. Like not just, hey, I want to be proactive about asking you for stuff, but again, wanting to really be in charge of something. And I think it's in the title, right? Virtual assistant versus, you know, somebody who is managing or like in a leadership role. So even though VA is the buzzword of the day, do not put yourself into the VA box. I really suggest people double and triple check with themselves, whether if they're hiring for an admin role, whether a VA is truly the admin role that they're trying to hire for. And, you know, I think that could be a whole other podcast.
We probably should have broken this one up into 4 episodes based on the topic.
Really? We honestly could have talked, I think, for an hour on each of those. But let's ease into, was that all that you wanted to share on proper screening? I mean, again, proper screening definitely could have been its own episode, but was there anything else you wanted to share on this topic before we move on?
No, if anyone has any questions, I could talk about this for hours, as we just covered. So definitely like reach out and you can send me an email. My email is Celene, Celene at anansicontent.com. That's ANANSICONTENT.com. Like seriously, I will talk your ear off about this, or I'll take a look at what you're doing and I'll give you my thoughts.
Yeah, this is, you know, something that has been, even though, of course, Celene as director of ops is actually the hiring manager. She's the person who does all the screening. I often don't meet candidates until we've already hired them, sometimes until they've already been trained or started their training. But I have to say, going through this process of refining our hiring and seeing what an impact that has made on our team, where I genuinely and truly feel like I am showing up to work every day to work with some of the coolest, smartest, most thoughtful, impressive people that I have ever had the pleasure of working with or meeting. And I get to work with them every day. It really transforms your whole business experience, especially as a leader, especially as someone who, you know, maybe has some control issues and struggles to delegate, maybe just a little bit.
Not you.
Right? Having the type of candidates from day one, that live up to that kind of optimism and hope and hype when you're hiring a new person, being able to really, really see when someone's not fitting, and to have people really going above and beyond and out of their way to connect with each other and engage and etc. I have found that is actually one of my purposes in life. Being able to create that kind of work environment for people is like the best drug for me. Talking to people and knowing that they're enjoying their workday is something that is really, really deeply resonant for me. It's something that Anansi and beyond I would like to continue to do because it is so needed and it is so rare in our world, both at the company level, right? Companies and organizations need the right people in the right seats at the right time. That is one of the biggest things you can do to kind of grow and thrive and succeed and to not be overwhelmed and stressed all the time. But also workers need this. Workers need this. If you're wondering why someone is willing to jump through so many hoops and read a 2,000-word job description and go through a 4 to 6 stage hiring process and etc., it's because they're hungry for work environments that challenge and excite them. And it really is an epidemic in North America and beyond. So many people are stuck in boring, unengaging work situations. And I really think that this is an opportunity here that you have as a business owner or business leader to both supercharge your own business, supercharge your own level of stoke, right? And you don't have to be building an 8-person team. Not everybody wants that, right? Some people just looking for an assistant. There's real magic here and real impact that you can have in people's lives and on the world. This stuff matters. But we do actually have one more point to address here. Maybe now you're feeling super jazzed. You're thinking, yeah, I want to go out and start hiring right now. I'm already emailing Celene. I'm thinking about my Google Forms, my hiring process. Maybe I'm looking up that tool. It was Vervo. Don't get too stuck on the tool, people. This last point, I think, is really critical because it's not so much kind of a step-by-step piece. It's more of a consideration. But I think that for me, this was one of the biggest changes this time around in terms of our considerations, again, in terms of hiring in a global economy and in a global workforce. And that is cultural influences and hiring choices. So a little bit of background context here, and sounds like this one is really my level of excitement here. So Celene, if you have to kind of step off or something, that is totally okay. But I just want to give a little bit of background here. A lot of people think of hiring overseas as unethical, right? We all have this image of the factory worker, suffering, needing to make their own bench, and this is a very real thing. We've all heard about the Apple workers, with committing suicide. And I don't know if we've all heard about that, but it's pretty intense. Yeah. But it kind of works both ways, right? The reality is that number one, wages and standard of living differ. Right. And so for us, it's really, really important to us as a business to pay a living wage. And we can pay a skilled, experienced worker overseas in some places a living wage to do the same job that we could barely scrape together enough to hire someone locally to do for minimum wage when it's not a minimum wage job. Right. Yeah. So I just want to kind of challenge that perception, first of all, that hiring overseas is kind of negative, or that hiring locally is by nature better in some way. The fact is, you want to hire the right person for the right seat at the right time. At the same time, I think that there's this kind of counter belief that we've all, many of us have read, like the 4-Hour Workweek. There's that kind of strong North American cultural idea that you can just hire a VA, maybe from the Philippines, and they will just solve all your problems and boom, that's all you need, right? Of course, the reality is somewhere in the middle. And what we have really, really found, I think, that isn't being talked about quite so much, it comes up a little bit in the Filipino VA example, is how culture and different countries' cultural myths affect where and how you choose to hire. We've really, really learned that different cultures affect different people's work cultures. And it's even in the word, right? We say this, we hire for culture, we hire for culture. But yet, for some reason, I personally felt really, really resistant to acknowledge that certain countries might have a cultural context or a cultural myth that makes them more or less of a good fit for us. right? Because I just wanted to believe that, there's, and this is true, there's a range of people within every country, and that doesn't exist, I'm afraid of being.
And we don't want to be like discriminating against certain cultures or something, or somehow feel like we're doing that.
Exactly. Right. So this is actually not what we're talking about here. But the fact of the matter is that if you talk to people in different countries, I mean, even just look at Canadians versus Americans, right? Like, we here are Canadian. I will tell you this, the stereotype that Canadians apologize all the time, it's true. It's 100% true. You know what I mean?
It's so funny. When I was interviewing someone for this admin position from the Philippines, and his question to me, he's like, "Are Canadians really the nicest people on earth?"
No. The answer is no. Right. So how did this kind of change for us this time? Did you want to share a little bit around? Yeah.
So in our previous admin roles, we've hired quite a bit from the Philippines. And I mean, there's a couple of reasons, like you mentioned, we can offer a really, really good wage to someone there. A lot of times there's a huge abundance and industry of Filipino virtual assistants or admin people.
Remote workers,
remote workers who especially work with a lot of digital agencies and are very familiar with the types of systems used, project management tools, et cetera, like Google Drive, Google Docs.
Also very compassionate and good, again, culturally, right? As a culture, they really value positivity and being pleasant to each other. So there's a lot of like customer service culture there. So there's a lot of customer service positions.
And, a lot of people have that background working BPO there. So that, and English is one of the official languages there. So there's a lot of like really good reasons to hire from the Philippines. Also, there's websites like onlinejobs.ph that makes it super, super easy.
Yeah.
But, one of the pitfalls that we've had from several people who work in the Philippines is they've been working 2 or 3 full-time jobs. And what's happened is, and, there's a lot of political upheaval as well. And it is still a developing country, so there's more health issues, more family emergencies, plus people working multiple jobs that we've had several times, this crisis that happens, whether it be, or sometimes, there's crazy weather storms there that can also affect people's homes. So there's been some sort of crisis and people are already burnt out working so many jobs that it just always implodes. Like, I don't want to say always, but pretty much.
It's happened at least 3 times in totally different situations.
Yeah, that like the person was totally genuine and sincere and it was out of their control, but it still happened.
Yeah, and I actually want to point out that this is something that we were kind of pulling out our hair trying to figure out, like, are we just unlucky? Are there just, crises going on for these people all the time? What's going on? And it was actually our temp worker from the Philippines who was quite candid with us. And she told us basically that the culture is very much, what did you call it, Celene? The desire to acquire?
Yeah, like I had quite a very real conversation with her, and it was enlightening, and it was very good to hear from her directly, because a lot of times, Filipino workers, like you said, they're very positive. They always want to put a positive spin in everything. They want to downplay issues that they're having. So it was really good to have that kind of like brutally honest conversation with her, where she said,
she was hired as a temp person. She was always going to be a temp person. She was not looking for that long-term job with us. Mm-hmm. So I perceive that we got a level of candidness from her that we may not have gotten from applicants.
Yeah, exactly.
Past, right? At first, it just seemed like a fluke, right? Like, we hired one candidate who seemed so perfect. And she was like, well, the only problem is that I have a full-time job somewhere else, but I think I can balance it and make it work. And I'm going to transition out of that position full-time. Mm-hmm. And I do think that she was really well-intentioned in that. She was great because after 3 days, she basically told us, like, not like I lied, but she was just like, I can't. Whereas in the past, we didn't realize this. But again, culturally, so this is not literally every person there, but this is what people are kind of encouraging each other to do and reinforcing and et cetera, is that almost everybody has a full-time job, which is 40 plus hours a week, and at least one part-time job at 10 to 20 hours a week, because they live with and support their extended families quite often. There's a lot of social pressure to provide.
And not only that, but as they become, earn more or become more successful or become one of the more successful members of that family, it's pretty much expected of them that they are going to support all the other branches of their family that are less affluent than them.
Yeah.
And so what she told me, she said, she's like, the least I ever work, like any day, is 12 hours a day. Sometimes I work 14 to 16 hours a day.
And that actually, it made so much sense with over the last few years, the maybe like 4 or 5 different Filipino workers that we've worked with.
Mm-hmm. And she also told me, she says, not only that, but every other person I know pretty much works that much. And if you have someone who is applying for this job and tells you they're going to work for you exclusively, they're lying. She said that, like, unequivocally. She said they're lying. And it's funny because one of the people that I did interview for this position, he told me, and this was very, again, very refreshing, and I really, really liked him as a candidate, but he was very candid about his intentions to work for us full-time in the graveyard shift and also have a full-time job during the day. Because he wanted to, support his extended family, give the best for his, his wife and his child, his close family. And that's what he, it wasn't a big deal to him. He just assumed that, because that's how many people work there. So he was going to have his graveyard job and he was going to have his full day job.
Yeah. And we've experienced this kind of confidence about working more than one job from a lot of different people. And, for us, it really comes down to, again, our values as a business. Now, both Celene and I have been in positions where we were working 50, 60 hours a week for extended periods of time, for me, relatively recently. And we know that, one of our values is radical wellness. We are all overachieving go-getters on our team.
Mm-hmm.
Like we are. In fact, we tried to make it so that our culture was more everybody just works less. And what we came to realize was that we need to really counterbalance that. We're all going to kind of overachieve and work too much. So we need to have a culture where we're kind of challenging people to also take that radical wellness time. And the reason for that is not just because we value wellness in people, but because that literally makes for better work, a better bottom line, happier employees that last longer. We have a lot of reasons for this, but ultimately it comes down to kind of one of our very, very core values. And we did open up last time. We did open it up to the Philippines again, kind of with this new lens of understanding and stuff. But we actually decided Celene did a bit of an analysis as to kind of which countries, kind of overlap with us in terms of time zone, cultural fit, where we can pay a living wage, et cetera. And we opened it up to other places as well, because we realized that a lot of the issues we had been having were not even necessary. Again, like we have been improving our screening process, improving our training process, improving all of that. But, even just having a different candidate from, I forget which country, Celene, I'm sure you can fill me in here. She, again, was quite direct. She was just like, no, here the culture is that everyone has one full-time job. That is your primary focus. That is what you do, etc. And even here on the Sunshine Coast, there's a different job culture than, say, in Langley, and that's just within BC,
Mm-hmm. She was actually from Chile, and the reason it came up was because now that we've had this issue a few times, we ask people what other commitments they have, if they have any other jobs or gigs or like their own businesses, and she was actually confused by my question, and I had to give her like a lot of context, and she's like, no, like here, everyone just has like exactly one job. That's what they do. And she's like, even if I wanted another part-time job, I wouldn't even know where to go to find one because it's not a thing here.
Which is funny because even here on the, again, Sunshine Coast, Gibson's, British Columbia, Canada, when I first moved here, I was shocked because even just moving from the city, here the culture is either you have a full-time job in trades, and that is the only thing that you do, or you have multiple part-time jobs. But it's like, it depends on your industry. Even compared to, say, the city, sorry, I'm just realizing this now as we're talking. This wasn't in my notes. It really does. Those cultural contexts really do make an impact, and it's important to consider them. Maybe not live and die by them in your hiring, but to consider them for sure.
Yeah. Like another example that's a really popular country to hire from for remote talent is Venezuela. And we've actually, we did open up candidates from and advertise in Venezuela in a couple rounds now, where I've interviewed people, but we haven't actually ended up hiring from there. And this is something I've heard from other people too, is yes, like it's a good country in terms of, low wages, and there's quite a few skilled people. But right now, there is a lot going on there. Like politically, the streets are really unsafe. inflation is astronomical, where things can cost twice as much from one week to the next. And so there's a lot going on. And so even if you hire someone from Venezuela, like it's not guaranteed that they'll be able to work with you continuously, because there's just so much going on in their own personal lives or their own like political climate that could affect their ability to work, whether it be their internet goes out for a month or,
that was actually something, I think this is something people are aware of in the Philippines as well. That was also a consistent challenge, was even someone who may not have had their internet out in like weeks, if a typhoon passes there or something, which with climate change is happening with increasing frequency, they might be out for a week. And if they're in a rural area, they may not have an internet cafe or something nearby,
Exactly. So, and then, there's also, again, we decided it wasn't as important for this role, but in terms of English skills, a lot of South American countries are popular for their ability to have high skilled workers for low wages, but the English isn't as strong as the Philippines in every case. But where we ended up hiring from was someone in Mexico, but we had some really good candidates from Chile, from Colombia. But it's really cool actually to be able to interview so many people from so many different countries and get their take on different things and get to meet them.
I even just hearing about it secondhand, reading their responses, seeing their videos, etc. It has been really, really cool and exciting because maybe this isn't like a business advantage necessarily, but just on a pure kind of like people and cultural level, it's really, really cool to get to know these different countries, these different people, how they approach things differently,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, for me, getting to know other countries really does come down to a lot of the time getting to know the people who live there as well as what the space feels like. And if I can't be there feeling what the space feels like, it's nice to just meet real people living their lives.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah. This has been a really, really, really great conversation. I am going to kind of wind us down now here, but was there anything else kind of on each of these topics, understanding the role and job description, making sure the responsibilities and compensation are on point, screening effectively, and then, considering kind of cultural influences and hiring choices? Was there anything you wanted to add on any of those topics?
I feel like I've probably talked our listeners' ear off enough as it is.
No, I think this has all been like, in terms of just a pure value-driven episode, I think there's been a lot of really, really kind of valuable, practical, actionable insight in this. So thank you a lot. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Just to our listeners, so just so you know, we're going to be doing more of these types of episodes, not necessarily always with Celene. Some of them will be, just kind of me sharing or sharing with different people on the team. But something that we've really kind of identified and gotten some positive feedback on is that we are very, very good problem solvers within the business. And we've been able to see the results of that problem solving in the results of our business. We also have this opportunity often to see what many, many other digital agency owners are doing. At any given time, we're working with over a dozen digital agencies. And as a digital agency owner, you may not have that same privilege to know what other people are doing. Now, obviously, we're not giving away anything that is kind of secret or sensitive in terms of people's specifics, but we have been able to observe which strategies can be very effective for a wide variety of people and why sometimes they're great and sometimes they're not. So we want to make sure that we're sharing that expertise with you. When it comes to communicating, we genuinely and truly believe that communication has the power to create the world that we want to see within a single generation. That's one of the things that drives us here at Anansi. And so we want to make sure that we are bringing that value to you in every way we can, whether that's with clients, whether that's behind the scenes with your team, whether that's on an organizational level. We are here for you. Anyway, as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. We will be back next week with another amazing episode. I'm super, super looking forward to it, but I hope that you guys have an excellent, excellent day in the meantime. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.